All right, we've been talking about the two major city-states of Greece, which are, everybody? Right? And so I thought it'd be fun to take a little quiz here. This is not for grade or anything. This is just to tax our memory a little bit, see if we learn. I didn't come up with this. I found this online. So we'll just go through it and see what comes of it. Okay. Which had the largest population, you suppose?
Athens.
Why do you think Athens?
Because they have like a better set of rules.
Okay. Is it easier to live there?
They let more people in.
And they let people in? Okay. Sounds reasonable. Next, which was a limited democracy? Everybody think about it for a second. Okay, we'll let John answer. Okay, why did you say that?
We went over yesterday that they were democracy.
Speak louder, please, so they can hear.
They were democracy for a little bit, and I think they changed like back to it later.
Okay, well the next question is, which was a military oligarchy, and what was that? Everybody say it together.
Sparta.
Yeah, Sparta. Is that what everybody said? Okay. Which one had two kings? Do you remember that? Amelia, do you remember?
Athens?
How many agree with Athens? How many think it was Sparta? Yeah, it was Sparta. Okay, which one had an assembly?
Athens.
Athens, okay. Which one had citizens as the upper class? The upper class was called citizens. Remember that?
Athens, yeah.
Athens, right? Which had foreigners as a working class?
Sparta. Athens.
that?
Who's Athens?
What was it?
It's both.
All right, go ahead and look in your notes. Since there's a division of opinion here, I'll let you find it.
Who's Athens?
Which, if you think about it, makes sense because they allowed foreigners in, so they were working class there. Okay, which one had slaves?
Both.
Both. Good job. Didn't trick you. Which was the leader of the Delian League? I'm not sure if we talked about the Delian League.
Athens.
We'll talk about that soon. Athens is the answer there. How about the leader of the Peloponnesian League?
Sparta.
Yeah, we did talk about that one, Sparta. Which had the strongest navy?
Sparta. Athens.
It's Athens. We didn't talk about that yet. Well, we will soon. Which had the strongest army on land?
Sparta.
Sparta, right? Which had militaristic values?
Sparta.
Yeah, you got to get that one. Which one had democratic values?
Athens.
Athens. Which limited women's role in politics?
Athens. Athens. Athens.
Well, they both limited their role in politics because neither one were women allowed to have an active role. But the next question is maybe better for us to ask: which gave the most freedom to women?
Athens.
That'd be Athens. Which valued choral dance and music?
Athens. Athens.
I hear a rumbling of Sparta underneath all the Athens. Why do you say what you're saying? Either one.
For the helping players with that.
Yeah, the dance helped the Spartans in their military endeavors. What about the music? Yeah, Athens was more likely to have both of those things, choral dance and music. I wonder, there's more on here, but it's off of the edge. So we'll just, the last one is which valued athletics?
Sparta.
Yeah, Sparta. All right. today we want to move on to what's called the Fateful Century, and that begins with the Persian Wars. First, we want to look at the conditions that influenced the war. First, many Greek colonists set out from mainland Greece, which is over here, evicted by the Dorians. Remember, the Dorians came down from the north, and they ended up in Ionia in Asia Minor. So here's the area of Ionia. So they basically just went across the Aegean Sea from Greece and settled over here in what we call Asia Minor. Today it's sort of part of Turkey. Paul established several churches in this area. The church at Ephesus is either here or down here. I can't remember which one. All right, so a lot of Greek colonists came and settled over here. Well, then they came under the rule of the Lydians, and King Croesus, remember King Croesus? He was defeated by the Persians, so he had control of this area. And then the Persians took over. That meant that the Greeks here were under Persian rule. Well, the Ionian Greeks found the Persian rule oppressive, and so they attempted a revolt against Persia with the help of Greeks over here on the mainland. Following so far? Mainland Greece then came to the attention of the Persians, and war between them began. So it's like the Persians conquered this area, and they really weren't concerned about what's over here. But now that those in Greece are interfering with the lands that over which Persia has control, now they want to do something about it. They don't like the fact that the Greeks were helping these people rebel against them, and so they initiate war with Athens, and that begins what's called the Persian War. So a lot of tension and anger between them. All right, so here's the area, Ionia, that we're talking about, that was Greek settled, but Persia took over, and the Greeks tried to help them revolt against Persia. Darius I put down this revolt, and then he sought to punish Athens, who was the main instigator among the Greeks for. Oh. That song might be appropriate if we're talking about the Trojan War, Helen, but not the Persian War. All right. So Darius is moving to punish Athens, and so he takes ships and he lands over here at the Bay of Marathon. Oh, here it is. In 490 BC. So he lands up in this area. He's going to march down to Athens. And why he just didn't settle at Athens, I'm not sure. But that's what he decided to do, is come down this way. The Greeks surprised the Persian army with a charge and fierce fighting that brought the Greeks the victory. Now the Athenian force was outnumbered, but they were strong on their flanks and on the edge. The middle was weak, but they attacked with their flanks and were able to defeat the Persians on their flanks, and then turn to assist the weak middle. And so they're able to achieve victory. Apparently, only 192 Athenians were killed, which doesn't include some other casualties of the Plataeans and maybe some slaves that were with them. The figure that we have of the Persian casualties was 6,400. Some think that's an exaggeration, but others say maybe not so much. At the end of the battle, a runner was dispatched to carry the news back to Athens, which was about 25 miles away. And you know what happened when he reached his destination. He died. Fell over dead after delivering the message. So, to look over the Battle Marathon once again, took place in Marathon, Greece. There's the date. This was the first victory over the Persians. Those are the leaders. Athens' army was about a third the size of the Persians. They were able to enclose the Persians by flank maneuver on both sides. And then the Greeks marched back to Athens. And they fought off another Persian force along the way. Okay, here is a map that shows the Battle of Marathon. The Persians are landing here, and the Greeks are coming this way, the Athenians, and they're able to come over to the side, this side, this side. They're able to defeat the Persians on the flank, and then move around and surround them. And of course, there's the runner going back to Athens to give them the good news. All right, so that's Darius the First attempt at conquering particularly Athens or Greece in general, and he was not able to do so. So he's followed after his death by his son Xerxes. Remember Xerxes? About 10 years later, he gathered together a great army, and he crossed what's called the Hellespont, a narrow area of water between Europe and Asia. And he decided to do it, instead of sailing his men across, he built a bridge out of boats. He constructed 2 bridges, each made of over 300 ships, tied together by a network of ropes. On the coast, a fleet of some 1,200 ships amassed, while on land, over 100,000 soldiers made camp at Sardis in Turkey, awaiting their orders. So, pretty ingenious plan. Tie the boats together, put planks of wood on top, and then you can take your horses all the way across, because horses don't do well in boats to try to sail them across. So this was his plan to get them there. And this is where they're going. They're coming here to the area of called Thermopylae. Now, faced with such an overwhelming force, most of the Greek cities decided to ally themselves with the benevolent rule of the Persians. They switched sides because the Persians had a whole lot of people, as the figures I just told you will indicate. So there was only a small confederation of city-states left that were going to fight against the Persians, mostly made up of Athens and Sparta. And they were determined to resist Xerxes. At most, they possessed around 30,000 men and a few hundred ships. By the spring of 480, Xerxes' army had reached Macedonia in the north of Greece. Not too far back to get a map. But it's up to the north, and then they were coming down, just like Darius had tried to do. So the Persians are coming south. Well, the Spartans, 300 Spartans and several thousand allies were sent to occupy the narrow pass of Thermopylae to stop the Persians from getting through. It was not far from the Greek fleet that was anchored off the nearby coast. And what happens is that there are 300 Spartans take a stand here at this pass in the mountains. Now, I always pictured it as being mountains on both sides and this pass in between. But in reality, it's mountains on one side over here and water on the other. So the pass they had to go through was flanked on one side by water and another side by mountains. So it is a narrow area that they had to go through in order to conquer Greece. So Persia, led by Xerxes, is trying to get through that area. There are 300 Spartans that are standing in the way. Now, because it's such a narrow place, you know, Xerxes can only send so many Persian soldiers at a time. You know, it's only so wide. Well, that was enough that the 300 Spartans could keep fending them off, keep killing them. Now, if Xerxes had been able to send all his men at once, then Spartans didn't stand a chance. But because the pass is only so wide, you can only send that many. And so the Spartans kept beating them back and beating them back. The Spartans were led by King Leonidas, and they held the Persians at bay for nearly a week until finally someone betrayed them. A Greek came to Xerxes and offered to show him a way around the pass, took him up into the mountainous area, and came down around the other side. So now the Persians were on both sides of the Spartans, and when they attacked, the Spartans had nowhere to go. They could not defend themselves. They were finally defeated and were killed in the process. But they had delayed Xerxes and protected the majority of the Greek army from destruction and gave the rest of the Greek army a chance to retreat and to gather more forces. Here's another drawing of this pass. As you can see, the Persians coming through here, finding a pass up through the mountains, come around the other side, right there. Now today, that water is not there. It has receded a couple of miles. So it's land now. But I'll show you a picture of what it looks like looking toward the mountain. This is standing near the memorial that is set up for the Spartan soldiers that fought there. And you can see how mountainous this is. And on the other side over here would be water. So not a lot of room in between. So, Leonidas, the heroic stand. You have a Spartan king, made the last stand to give Greek cities time to prepare. 300 Spartans, 7,000 other allies against an army 20 times that size. Chose to fight in a mountain pass. The first day, Xerxes' troops got butchered. Second day, he sent in his best troops, called the Immortals. They were also beaten back. Second night is when the Greek traitor told Xerxes of a pass to get behind the Spartan force. Leonidas sent his allies away, knowing that it was sure death, so he gave them a chance to escape. For he remained with his 300 and fought in a tight circle so the enemy could not break their formation. But eventually they were defeated. Now this is not the only time a battle was fought there. During World War II, there also was a battle fought between the British and the Germans in Thermopylae. The British also were surrounded and overwhelmed. Oops, that came up late. Leonidas died fighting. Persians pushed back 4 times. Arrows finally killed the last Spartans. Leonidas was beheaded and crucified. And today we still look back on the bravery of the 300. How many of you have heard of the 300 before? The 300 Spartans? Yeah. Almost everybody. This painting someone's done to commemorate Leonidas and his men. Here's the monument. This is a model of Leonidas. And here's the monument dedicated to the 700 Thespians who died at the Battle of Thermopylae prior to the final 300. In 6 days, 200,000 Persians died, 300 Spartans. Now this is a good quote. A Spartan was told about the great number of Persian soldiers who with their arrows would conceal the sun. In other words, they had so many archers that when they shot their arrows, there were so many arrows that it blocked out the sun. And the Spartan, some say Leonidas, said, "So much the better, we will fight in the shade." So fearless, nothing was going to stop them. All right, following the Battle of Thermopylae, then, as the Persians broke through, they made their way down to Athens. And when they arrived at Athens, the people had left, and so Xerxes burned the city to the ground. The inhabitants of Athens had gone to the nearby island of Salamis to escape. Now, according to Herodotus, the Greek historian, Themistocles sent his slave Sicinius in a boat to Xerxes, where he delivered this message. "The general of the Athenians sent me without the knowledge of the other Greeks, for he is on your side and wants you rather than the Greeks to win, to say that they are afraid and planning to run for it. You can now achieve a brilliant coup if you don't sit by and watch them run. They are not in agreement among themselves and so will not oppose you. Their naval battle, as you will see, will be against each other, those on your side and those not." Themistocles is believed to have made Sicinius a free and wealthy man for his efforts at bringing this message. So what's the message saying? The Greek ships are going to make a run for it. And if you really want to defeat them, if you act now, you can get them and at a time when they're fighting against each other. So now will be an opportune time to attack. And so Xerxes believes the message, which was a deception. And so he brings his ships down into this area and comes into the Bay of Salamis to fight against the Athenian ships that are there. Now, here's a picture of what an Athenian ship looked like, called a trireme. You can see it's kind of narrow, built low. The oars, here's a nicer picture. And so the Persians come into this area ready to do battle. The Greek ships had come in here, they're in this area. And what happened is, as they're in this small bay area, the Persian ships, which were really big, had difficulty maneuvering. And the Greek ships were smaller and they could move around a lot better and use the ends of their ships to batter against the Persian ships and sink them. So the Persian ships are lined up, the Greek ships are going. The Persian ships can't maneuver around. The Greek ships are able to maneuver around and are able to defeat them. Xerxes, meanwhile, was sitting up on a hill on land watching the battle. He thought, this will be fun. I'll watch my navy just totally annihilate the Athenian navy. But that's not how it worked out. So he was very discouraged and disappointed, and he left and went back to Persia. But he left one of his generals in charge. And he stayed in the area and ended up fighting the next year against the Greeks once again, led by Sparta, in the Battle of Plataea. And that defeat was the end of the Persian attempt to invade and conquer Greece. The battle itself was a series of battles, and the Persians were initially successful, but eventually the Greeks were able to defeat them, especially when the Persian commander was killed in a cavalry charge. Herodotus described the battle as the finest victory in all history known to me. So he thought it was a pretty good battle. All right, now the effect of the Persian Wars, or the Persian War, on the Greek Empire. First of all, the Athenians felt that the Persian War was a defining moment in their history. They thought, because they were victorious over the Persians ultimately, that really built them up. The victory of the war over Persia made Athens one of the strongest city-states in Greece. So Athens comes into a dominant position in Greece. They gain wealth as a result of that. Many other of the city-states began looking to Athens for help, as opposed to Sparta. The alliances that Athens made after the victory, as well as the Delian League, would catapult it into immense power. So they got allies together, formed the Delian League. And that made Athens also the cultural center of the Greek world. So Athens just keeps gaining more and more prestige and power as a result of the Persian War. And of course, the Spartans reacted against that. They became frightened about Athenian power, suspicious about the Athenians. Athens had a great amount of power, but that power would also cause their downfall and would eventually lead to what's called the Peloponnesian War, which is a war between Athens and Sparta. And we will get to that a little bit later. Meanwhile, we enter into what's called the Golden Age of Greece. Shortly after the victorious battles of Salamis and Plataea, Greece entered into its Golden Age, led by an Athenian democratic leader named Pericles, also called then the Periclean Age. A number of its citizens would become some of the most famous who ever lived. This is a hall of fame of Greeks, and they're all from this period of time in Athens. There's Herodotus, the father of history. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine. Socrates, the philosopher. His student Plato, a philosopher. His student Aristotle, a philosopher. Demosthenes, one of history's greatest composers of oration, speeches. Now, how many of these guys have you heard of? Put the number of fingers up for those that you've heard of before today. Herodotus, Hippocrates, Socrates, how many have you heard of? 5, 1, 4, 3, 2, is that 6? How many are there? Oh, you've heard all of them. Okay, that's great. 4. You hadn't heard of any of them. Okay. These are names with which you should be somewhat familiar. And I expect you to be very familiar with them before we have a quiz, something like that. Okay? Here is a picture then of the area that is controlled by Sparta, the Peloponnesian area, and then Athens up in this area with the Delian League. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the School of Greece, which is in your notes, School of Greece, and that refers to their advances in culture and education. Excellence was the key to the School of Greece. And they were interested in advancing in the areas of thought, thinking, they wanted to be involved in that. In science, I'm sorry, the second one is art. In science, in literature, and drama. So these are all ways in which the Athenians excelled during this golden age. And you can see why we call that. They really did well in all of these areas. Oh, the last one I forgot, architecture. Architecture. Much of what we know from the Greeks and their building has to do with architecture of this time. It's still reflected in many of our buildings in this country today. Now, the government at this time becomes a democracy, as we learned before. We looked briefly at Pericles a day or two ago. And by democracy, we mean that every adult male who was a citizen of Athens, every adult male citizen, could vote and hold office. And that's unusual. That's the first time that I know of in the world that such a system was established. Now tomorrow we're going to begin looking at the war between Sparta and Athens. And in preparation for that, I want you to read and take notes on pages 57 to 60 in your textbook, pages 57 to 60, and do the section review questions on page 60. And then tomorrow we'll talk about the Peloponnesian War. Any questions?